Welcome to the Zelos Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, I've got the guy who wrote the book on movement, literally. Great cook. Functional movement screening. When it comes to movement screens, he put it on the map. We're going to get underway in just a second, but before that, we both are going to be at the Perform Better 3-day functional summit this year. 3 locations, Providence, Rhode Island, Chicago, Illinois, and Long Beach, California. Check out performbetter.com if you like what you hear in this conversation. 3 days of it. Wow. In another 3 days this summer will be July 16th to the 19th. I'll be at the NSCA 2025 National Conference. Come join me there. And if you can't do that, maybe go to my website. I've got a lot of continuing education, blogs, and podcast archives, and a whole bunch more. While you're on there, well, switch over to setantacollege.com, get a master's, get 10% off tuition with RS10. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Hit that subscribe button. Here we go. Great. Thanks for coming on the Zelos Podcast. It's been something you've been on my bucket list, shall we say, of guests, and finally I get to check it off. So welcome, brother. Good to have you on.
I'm glad to be here, and unfortunately, I'm overdressed. You wore the sleeveless Gray Cook shirt. I went ahead and put on sleeves for you because I'm trying to pro up for you, but the sleeveless is right over there hanging on the chair because that's the way I walked in the office this morning.
Well, that's why I'm dressed like I am. For those watching the video, obviously you'll see it, and those listening in, yeah, I've got the cutoff because I had no idea you actually own sleeves. That was a surprise right now. First, you didn't go out shopping just for this, did you?
Well, I don't wear sunblock anymore. I just wear a hat and these 50 SPF shirts because literally between fishing and paddleboarding and being out on the farm and stuff like that, I'm trying to protect my skin. So I don't have on a shirt a little bit, and then I put one of these on, but I'm not dealing with all the sunblock. I just throw my Tilly hat on and my Salt Life shirt on and keep trucking on and hopefully pushing off the melanoma. So,
well, you're ahead of me there, I'm sure, because liquid nitrogen's in my future for sure. Now, okay, before we get underway with talking about movement and all that, stand-up paddling. Are you flat water? Are you waves? What, are we talking surf or just lakes and rivers? What do you do?
Believe it or not, I do a lot more on a paddleboard in what I would consider light to medium white water than I do in the ocean, just because my condo in Wrightsville Beach was just a nice little surf village on the North Carolina shore at the base of Hatteras. But I don't get down there a lot, but I'm much more about finding flat water, maybe working with a tidal shift. And literally, I'm the guy who likes to find a point like 5 miles on the horizon and just get into a rhythm. I can relate the kettlebell swing to the way I paddle just because I'm a little bit of a diesel. I'm a little bit lower stroke rate than most of the guys I race against, but I beat them just because I can hold that. I literally probably have raced a few different times. I did a 21-mile race at one point, but I stay in zone 2 the whole time. So I'm not really shredding. I'm not rounding my back. I'm just basically doing a reverse deadlift and really learning to paddle. And I even posted a video on YouTube saying, I'm not a paddleboard instructor, but if I was, I wouldn't start anybody standing up. I'd start you laying prone and learn how to save your life if you lose your paddle. But then I'd come up to tall kneeling and half kneeling and really get into a lot of that Olympic canoe style. But that's chops and lifts to me. So my warm up is basically my first 5 minutes. I'm not standing, but I'm working out that hip mobility. Got neck surgery. I've had some hernia surgeries, but 30 catches on each side, half kneeling. I've already got my warm up, and I've been on the water the whole time. I wasn't doing the sun salutation on the beach. I just did it on the board. So,
well, you gotta come on out here to Santa Cruz because in September, near the end of September, we have an annual event. It's called the Bay Crossing. We start at Santa Cruz Harbor at just before first light, and we make our way out to what's called the M1 buoy, about 6 miles in the Monterey Bay. When we hit that buoy, we kind of do a little dogleg left and make a bearing for Monterey. And we get to Fisherman's Wharf and stop at Del Monte Beach. So the total is 28.5 miles. I do it prone, and I'll do it tall kneeling because I've got a prone board. But there's guys out here with their stand-ups, and they just smoke me every time. But it's not necessarily a race. It's a fundraising event, but we've been doing it now 7 years. Started when I turned 50, and then I didn't mean for it to be an annual event, but because it was a fundraising event, they encouraged us to do it again the next year because they wanted those funds. And oh man, when you create a monster. Speaking of that, what a great segue. Creating a monster, FMS, brother. When you started thinking of this concept, and I know you talked about it before, but I just wanted to, for the new listening audience that may not be familiar with the functional movement screen, don't know what cave you've been living in, but when you started that, did you ever think that it would erupt, explode, evolve, and grow in the way that it has? I mean, give us a little rundown of how the FMS started, if you don't mind, like in a minute
Okay.
or two, and then where you are now.
All right. I went to University of Miami. They had a really great PT program, and academically, I was pretty challenged. I wasn't the 4.0, but I just enough to get into Miami. I had a BS in sports medicine. I hadn't even finished my athletic training hours. I already had the degree, but I got into PT school, and I either had to finish my hours in the training room at U of M, but I wasn't going to stand in line and tape ankles when a strength coach named Bill Ferran was on the other side of the hall doing Olympic lifts. And dude, I went to high school in Virginia. We worked on the farm. We did a few deadlifts, and we went both ways in a football game. And if you didn't lose 9 pounds in the game, you weren't trying. I didn't have any formal lifting background. But when I'm at Miami, I became a strength coach and a PT literally the same year. So I tell people I've always had this conflicted thing. I've always felt the responsibility to prevent injuries that I get paid to rehab, meaning if it's an unfortunate accident, I'm your PT, but I'd much rather finish as a strength coach that doesn't have you back in here. And I've always tried to carry that burden with integrity. I wind up in the Midwest sort of trying to fly Top Gun. In physical therapy, there's a thing, board certification, just like there is in medicine. And I had to make a decision. Do I become a sports specialist or an orthopedic specialist? And I realized while I was at Miami, most great PTs in sports know how to rehab knees and shoulders that have been cut off. But when it comes to a back or a neck or a core problem, they usually defer to a chiropractor or a surgeon, and the PTs back off. And I'm like, dude, I want to prevent this stuff, because how do you rehab a knee without looking at the glutes and the opposite side lat and the obliques and the dumping the pelvis forward? So I really got this appreciation in manual therapy of doing this head to toe examination. Well, as my mentor was challenging me to be a great orthopedist, I'm like, all right, which backs take the biggest beating of any backs in the world? And you might think MMA or whatever. I went straight into Olympic weightlifting, and I know you got the same credential. And when I was working in Peoria, Illinois, and watching these guys with a broom handle do an overhead deep squat, and I'm like, oh my goodness, these guys, when they train, not in the US, but in other places, they get the movement pattern before we slide plates on that damn bar. And what do we do here? We got people doing snatches the very first day with 25s, 35s, and 45s on there. And don't get me wrong, a little bit of weight on the bar does give proprioceptive awareness. But I sort of adopted this philosophy of secure the movement, add the load. Don't add the load and coach the movement as a secondary effect. And so I've got this methodical orthopedic breakdown. At the same time, I'm challenging myself, because when I had these Olympic weightlifting guys, I was never going to be a level 1 Olympic weightlifting coach, but I wanted to be respected by the coaches. So when I had these guys with these back extension injuries and these abdominal tears, I'm like, if I can fix those backs, I can fix backs in the NFL, I can fix backs in mogul skiing, I can fix backs in the MMA. And so as I'm getting all these back specialty credentials, for every time I add an orthopedic credential, I explore kettlebells. I'm Pilates mat certified. I got the Olympic weightlifting thing done. And so I've always tried to bring that over. Well, 3 years later, I'm back in my hometown and I'm running 3 clinics. I'm the director, and I'm in my early 30s. And I'll go for a biblical analogy. I was working in the Tower of Babel. Everybody's speaking a different language. And yet I'm in charge of all these people. And I am sort of the Top Gun orthopedist. If somebody needs their neck cracked or something like that, I'm the go-to. So I found myself in a position where I'm mentoring a bunch of young PTs and athletic trainers that are only a couple of years younger than me. But I set myself up to do multiple evaluations. And I would take the knees and shoulders and some of the easy cases and peel them off to my less staff. And I would take the hard cases and I would just try to break it down. And as I became better in orthopedics, a lot of colleges were flying me around to look at athletes, high profile people, with this thing called osteitis pubis. It's the sports hernia that we talk about today. It's the adductors and abs just getting overpowered by the posterior chain. I go out to this very high-ranking university. I examine this kid who's already had his abs and adductors reattached to his pelvis twice.
Oh, twice.
Rocky, they missed a dorsiflexion restriction. And I know you can identify, right? Because you're a ground up guy. So I start my examination, my methodical process. But this is a big time university. So I'm in a theater, orthopedic surgeons, 3 of them on the front row, team physician, 18 strength coaches in the room from all sports, the athletic trainers, the nutritionists, sports. Everybody's watching me examine this poor freaking kid in his tighty whities in a theater style. And I'm just running him through movements. And I've got him standing on one foot and touching his toes and rotating and squatting. And the orthopedist was like, dude, it's his pelvis. And I'm like, oh, I'm perfectly aware of that. I knew that when I bought my plane ticket. But osteitis pubis is usually a diagnosis associated with a complicated pregnancy. He ain't been pregnant. So where did this come from? And I'll fast forward this to get to the movement screen story. This kid was the fastest kid in the country at the time. And he couldn't come to the university and train early because of NCAA rules, but he did get sort of pulled into this franchise that it was very popular to have kids run on a high-speed treadmill uphill. I don't inherently have a problem with that, except for the fact that as a strength coach, I'm an economist. I've only got a certain amount of time and energy. And if this kid's already the fastest kid in the country, he can outrun most of the people that'll chase him, maybe the thing I ought to be working on isn't his speed. Maybe I should be working on lateral agility, or the fact that he doesn't cut as well left as right, or the fact that his neck's a little locked up and being a running back is highly visual, right? Why are we working on the one attribute he's already best at? Why don't we drop back and see if he's got any debt anywhere? Running up a high-speed treadmill with a dorsiflexion restriction requires you to break your own pelvis in half. You can't use your pelvis as a bowl anymore. It becomes a bowl with a crack in it. And that was the beginning of this. Well, as he spent a lot of time with a stiff ankle on one side running up that hill, he had to adjust his stride. And this kid is full of fast twitch. He's got opportunity. He's youthful. He's full of testosterone. And he broke himself. And the athletic trainers thought the strength coaches did it. The strength coaches thought the athletic trainers didn't rehab him right. And I'm like, I honestly think we tried to fit a, round peg in a square hole. Why didn't we do this? And so I went through my whole exam. I mowed his ankle. We did a lot of things, but on the Delta flight on the way back, I didn't have a Palm Pilot. I didn't have an iPad. I grabbed Delta napkins and I said, if I could have seen these movement patterns before he got on the treadmill, I would have had a reason to say, not today, let me go do this first. Now, between me and you, the high-speed uphill treadmill was not my default for gaining speed, but I don't have an inherent problem with it as long as you don't cause harm. That's the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. So I drew out the overhead deep squat. I drew out an inline lunge that had you lock up your upper body and use a stick so I could see if you compensate with your spine. I had a hurdle step that made you step not over somebody else's opinion of what a stride should be, but your own tibial height. So I tried to make it very body relative to your own dimensions. And I also tried to have some fundamental and functional movements. So we've got a leg raise that's flat on your back. We've got a push-up that's in a plank position. So I get to watch some of the developmental positions as well as the 3 stances of all function, which is single leg stance, asymmetrical stance, symmetrical stance. I come back to the clinic and I had the Tower of Babel, athletic trainers, strength coaches, PT assistants, PTs, one chiropractor. We're all in there sort of bouncing it off of each other. And I'm like, what if we did this at the high school physicals this year? And here's what happened. When we put these movements together, we were going to make sets and reps. And I'm like, nope, that's conditioning. I want to look at movement quality, and movement quality should be seen without a warm up, and it should be seen in one rep. Meaning the worst case scenario is you got to sprint cold. I'd like to know what you're bringing to that scenario. There's other things we can do. And I wasn't saying let's not do all the other tests. 20% of the kids that pass their pre-participation physical with the sports medicine physician came to our station. But instead of physical therapists and athletic trainers helping with height and weight and, stuff like that, we did a movement screen. 20% of the kids had pain with one or more of those movements after being cleared in their pre-participation physical. And I'm like, oh crap, what have we been missing? Because I got a feeling when you do two-a-days, the first kids we're going to see are the kids that are already in pain. And the second kids we're going to see are the kids that aren't necessarily in pain, but they can't cover the move. So when you put a kid who can't deep squat in a three-point stance, how does he not have a rounded back? How does he get deep into that power push-off position like the sprinter's block? And we evolved from there. Out of the 7 patterns that I wrote down, we retained 5 and we altered 2. And it came out in one of our podcasts that, we had a scoring scale, which is exceptional, acceptable, unacceptable, and painful. And looking through that, you could potentially score 21. And a lot of people have assumed that you're supposed to shoot for 21. You're not. It's blackjack. All you got to do is beat the dealer. And the dealer says you got to have 2s on everything with no asymmetries to literally not have a movement problem before we start investigating your conditioning problems. So many of the problems that I've seen in throwing mechanics, paddling mechanics, running mechanics, go back to the fact that we're so engaged in the frequency, intensity, volume domain that we never go back and establish well before often. And so that's sort of where the concept came from. I'm trying to be a physical therapist, putting myself out of business for all the unnecessary injuries that shouldn't occur if we would screen first. And it's funny because we went through COVID. If I shine the thermometer on your forehead, Rocky, you can't come in the gym today. Okay. And nobody's got a problem with that. It's not personal, but you're not going to do yourself or them any favors. But I should be able to say the same thing to a kid with a tight ankle getting ready to do deep squats, hang cleans, or get on a high-speed treadmill. It's just like, not today. It's not personal, but no good will come of this. And it became very controversial. A lot of people thought I was trying to sell out the physical therapy profession and make everybody become a PT doing an assessment. And I'm like, no, anybody can run an eye chart and anybody can run a BP cuff. And this is that for movement. And if you fail the eye chart, maybe you do need to see somebody who's an eye specialist. And if your blood pressure spiked, maybe you don't need to practice today. How's a movement screen any different? So that was my central premise. And from that base of screening movement, we developed a better orthopedic model. And Greg Rose, and he brought that model right into Titleist. And, we've had some offshoots, and the full evolution is we turned the whole thing into an app a couple of years ago, and we were just published in the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy saying, if I send you, Rocky, a pre-screen at home, and me and you are going to meet on the beach tomorrow for some wind sprints and paddling, I can pre-screen you, meaning you can screen yourself. And if you just answer the survey and screen correctly, there is a high degree of correlation between the exercises I would prescribe based on that and if I did a full screen. It doesn't replace the screen, but it sure does get me and you on the same page before I even ask you to overhead deep squat. So,
oh heck yeah, it kind of bridges between quantitative and qualitative quite nicely. The quality of movement, but measurable outcomes or predictions at that time. The beautiful thing too is like with your running back and the sprints up the incline treadmill and so on. Yeah, there's no such thing as a bad exercise. We'll agree to that. But it all depends on the quality of movement that the individual is exhibiting, which is going to really determine the outcome. Whether it's restriction and dorsiflexion or whatever, the cool thing here is that over the last, I would say, couple of decades, it has percolated up to the surface that we need to be more aware of an individual's injury history to help understand their compensatory patterns, their movement patterns, where before, and I think you'll agree that whether it's physical therapy or strength coaching, that was just something that, you did this when you were 5 years old. Okay, whatever. We didn't take much consideration. There wasn't much gravity to anything that happened because of some extended timeline. But if we really think about it, those earliest insults were what started these movement patterns until they got to another episode or an event, injury, surgery, accident, whatever, where now you have to negotiate on top of what you've already been negotiating for. So now we're in the United Nations and talk about different languages. We're talking about different strategies unconsciously that the body is trying to make up for. So I don't know about you. Well, I do. You just told me. For me, I didn't come about this occupation or my career path because I got injured and wanted to learn more about some type of rehabilitation. I used working out as my means of procrastination. I was not the 4.0 student either. In fact, when it came down to it, I'm surprised they even gave me a diploma. They had to hunt me down in the gym because that was where I was spending most of my time. I didn't want to study or go to class. Let's just go work out. But somewhere along the way, somebody started teaching me that there's a riddle in the human body, and there's many riddles, and it's probably the greatest puzzle you can unpack when it comes to movement and understanding how joints are coupled with one another, how movements are intertwined, and I think your SFMA, the FMS, all the ways that you look at movement are so refreshing and reinforcing to the thoughts that have been generating in my own head.
No, Rocky. I know your work, and the one thing I would say that we line up so well on is we both look for ways to speak to the body in a nonverbal way, because if we can create a correction, when, let's say, if I feed the mistake, I see you squatting and you shift way over to the left. One of my original hypotheses was, what if I feed the mistake? What if I exaggerate what you're not aware of is a complete malalignment? If you can self-correct on the fly, we might just have a proprioceptive issue. And I'll give you my example. I've rehabbed a lot of kids and established normal range of motion in the leg that was affected, equal strength, and pretty damn good balance, and they still limp. Now, I get them to run and the limp goes away. And I get them to do it slow and the limp goes away. But if a kid just came off of walking around high school in crutches with a hard cast on their leg, they've got this rhythm, this gait interrupt, and they still limp. The limping behavior is present, the pain's gone, the range of motion's restored. So sometimes people get a wrinkle in their software, too many apps open. The limping app is still open, so it's gonna leak in. If we do your training at other speeds, the limp goes away, but a lot of times it comes right back. So I've had parents say, he's still limping. And I'm like, yeah, and I don't know why. Let's do some stuff. When they push a sled, they don't limp, right? So I started saying, if they're shifting in the squat and don't know they're shifting in the squat, and I pull them a little bit more into the mistake, if they self-correct, then all I've got to do is slowly take that perturbation or offset away, and they're right back in there. I suggested without words that you rack and stack your shit a little bit better. And you do the exact same thing with wedges. But my whole point is, I'm not tying this band on you for the next 6 months, and you're not throwing those wedges in everybody's shoes just because there's a moment of correction. You're letting the correction wash over the neurological system and see if a new profile emerges. And so I have never complimented you in a public way about choosing to feed the proprioceptive system before you go into your coaching vernacular or your coaching phrases. And too many people default to verbal coaching. And at Greg Rose's level, when we're trying not to hook or slice a golf ball, or we're Tom House trying to throw a better pitch, yes, we need some of that verbal feedback. But squatting and lunging occurred in you before you could speak. And the only thing globally we all agree on, you said United Nations, the World Health Organization looks at the developmental milestones. And I don't care what climate, culture, country you're born in, every baby needs to hit these windows of crawling, creeping, squatting, standing, stepping, balancing, running. They need to hit those. And if they don't, something's wrong. Some could have a neurological problem. Some could have an orthopedic issue. That's not the point. We screen babies by pattern, and we focus on the pain where adults point, and rarely is pain the problem. So adults, because they had a boo-boo or an incident or their knee hurts, they need you to look at their knee. I do a head to toe on everybody that walks through the clinic door, whether they're pointing at their TMJ or their big toe. Because if you knew, if this was the problem, you should have fixed it by now. So I do owe you that upstream appraisal to go back. And many times I will try to create that self-correction input before I coach them back into integrity, because movement's not a skill, it's a birthright. And you literally were walking before you had command of language. Therefore, I should try to speak to your moving faculties in a nonverbal way whenever possible, and then use words to cultivate that to the next level.
I love that. I think that's the first time I have heard it. It may not be the first time it's been said to me. This is the first time I actually heard, the movement came before the language, which is just freaking
But
awesome.
dude, you intuitively do that. That's what you
Sure.
did, because it works better, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, so much better. I love, honestly, we just say we interview the body. That's what are we doing today? We're interviewing. We're not assessing, we're not appraising, we're not doing anything. I just want to ask your body different questions. And if you want to tell me things about it, but I just want to see what happens when you do this. What happens when you do this? The same thing you did on that stage with the running back, right? But okay, so there's so much to unpack here. But the one thing I want to get into is RNT, reactive neuromuscular training. Now, whether you coined that phrase or not, I've been still using it, but it's also kind of goes along the lines of osteopathy. I think they use direct or indirect, or some other cultures will use functional and structural, right? It's either one or the other. You and I are not rocket scientists. We are not, I don't know, you've probably worked with NASA. I would not be surprised if they called you up and said, need you to work with these astronauts. Totally. And you're going to say, oh, yeah, I'm doing that next week. But anyway, it's either, okay, we've got a knee that wants to go valgus and it wants to go beyond where it should. So you're saying, yeah, we just wrap a band around it and we send that puppy further into the valgus situation. You get that lengthening of tissue going beyond where it's normally used to. That fires up your proprioceptors, that initiates a stretch shortening reflex, and now you turned it on and the brain recognizes, well, wait a minute, I don't really want to go there. So it figures a way to get home, to get out of it. Now, that's the functional approach. That is the RNT approach. And then, so if that doesn't work, my caveman brain says, well, if it's not a 0, it's got to be a 1. If it's not left, it's got to go right. And, so, okay, I will send that knee in that direction. If I don't get the outcome I want, hey, let's just see if I do the opposite. Maybe I'll restrict that knee from going. Does that give me more? That for me is a structural kind of, I'm encouraging the joints to move in the direction that they ideally should be. And let's see if that gives me the outcome. It's kind of one or the other. And if I don't get the desired outcome by doing one or the other, then that's not the issue. I've got to look somewhere else. Because if I don't see a change occur in either of those two approaches, I'm missing something. And that's the key, I think we're both talking about, is we got to find what's missing. We don't want to. Go ahead.
No, when I mentor people, I try to take them to that binary crossroads, because if you think about the FMS, I went binary. I don't say, is it a 3, 2, 1, or 0? I said, is it a 3 or not? Is it a 2 or not? Is it a 1 or not? Is it a 0 or not? So there are binary decisions. But when I'm training my interns and residents now. I'll give you the example. Everybody's probably seen the toe touch progression. We bring you on stage, angle the feet up, angle the feet down. Now, you get pretty good at picking who you want to do that with. And if you've got steel rods in your back and you're very, very fearful and you're high anxiety, I'm probably not going to confront that pattern today, right? So I've got a little bit of experience, but for the most part, I'll pull somebody up on stage at a Perform Better event or an NSCA event who hasn't touched their toes since high school. And they'll come up there and they'll be about 2 inches below their kneecap. And everybody is getting ready to go fascial planes on me or go anatomy on me. Well, he's got a long femur and a short tibia. They're getting ready to go there. And I'm like, well, just wait 1 second, okay? Before we go there, let's decide, is this a tissue problem, which is going to take 4 to 6 weeks to change? Or is this a tone problem that could easily change with the right combination of let go of that, engage this? We don't ever reduce tone in one part of the body without increasing it somewhere else. So by me setting you back on your heels with your elevated toes, I force you to set your hips back before you go down. By setting your heels high, I force you to put all your weight on your toes. So I'm literally uphill, downhill, and making your foot not this fixed flat surface thing anymore. I'm making you have variability. Here's what happens. If I take 1.5 feet off that limitation and you come off of this thing and you're touching your toes, then everybody who had a tissue reason why you couldn't touch your toes has to go stand in the corner because you assume something you shouldn't have to. You were getting ready to say, well, I think we should scrape it, foam roll it. I think you need dry needling. We're going to have to get you into the splits before that's going to occur. All of these things are part of our training, part of our indoctrination, and so much of becoming a strength coach or a physical therapist when we went through our education was about changing tissue, the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demands. So we're assigning loads or we're assigning rehab loads. But what if we just got a car with the choke stuck on and you just got to feather that gas pedal and all of a sudden we don't have to go to the mechanic anymore? It's running perfectly just because we let it go through its paces. Well, people get stuck in these high threshold, high tone strategies. So when I do a toe touch and it works and somebody literally gains an unreasonable amount of flexibility in a short amount of time, I'm like, listen, I'm not Jesus Christ. There's only one of those. And I didn't change tissue. I changed tone. The hamstrings were doing more than the glutes, okay? The QLs were doing more than the abs. And by putting them in what I call a submission hold or a self-limiting exercise, it's like barefoot running. It hurts when I'm barefoot. Go slower. Still hurts. Go slower. Still hurts. Doesn't hurt. Well, I'm barely going faster than a walk. And that's where you should start barefoot running. You know what I'm saying? It's self-limiting. So listen.
Yes.
So there are people who respond only an inch or two in a toe touch progression. I'm like, listen, their tissues, that's about all they can give up today. Don't take any more from them than that because that's all they can give up. But it doesn't mean that I wouldn't do that drill upon waking and before and going to bed and maybe before a run or a workout. The people where it changes miraculously, it's not going to hold. They're going to have 2 sneezes. By the time they're back at their seat, they're going to start tightening back up. However, if you were to superset that within your workout, you're starting to hit save on the document. You're coming to your next set of lunges with a level pelvis. You're coming to your kettlebell swings with a level pelvis. Why? You got to have active rest anyway. And instead of doing a general active rest, I'm pointing it right at the movement pattern. And you and I are doing these little checks all the time. The only problem is if you don't set a baseline first, you can't take credit for the change. So I'm real adamant about if we're going to do this, we're going to play fair. I don't mind you questioning me, but question me fairly. So let's set a baseline. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. If I change movement for the good without a inappropriate side effect is kid gets huge, strong on the bench press, pecs get good, traps get good, shoulder mobility goes down 25 degrees. That's not a good exchange. I should be able to make your shoulder stronger without having to sacrifice range of motion at an appreciable level. So many of the decisions that I was making as a young strength coach were robbing Peter to pay Paul. We were getting stronger in the squat and losing depth. We were getting explosive in the lunge, but it was becoming asymmetrical. So setting the baseline didn't just give me the brand FMS. That damn little scale mentored us out of our own bullshit as a growing, burgeoning clinic. And before you know it, we went from being one of the smaller clinics in our city to a clinic that people were flying into in this little podunk town called Danville, Virginia. And all we were doing for these pro athletes that were flying in was the same thing we were doing for the local high school. It was counterintuitive, but it was working. So everybody says, how do you explain the movement screening to your clients? I'm like, I don't. I find out what they can't do, and I see if I can budge that real quick. And they either look back at me and say, how did that happen? And I'll explain it as tone, or like, that's a little bit better. They're not expecting to touch their toes. I'm like, that's a tissue problem. And so I literally know that they coexist, but there is a high tone bias for people who are living in a toxic lifestyle, inflammatory diet, not hitting good sleep cycles, not hydrating well, and not working out well. I can modulate their tone pretty quick because they're in a toxic environment. Whereas if that toxic environment has gone too long, or they've got injury that's not been appropriately rehabbed, we got to give the tissue time to adapt. So sometimes I'm going to play it like Tom Myers, and sometimes I'm going to play it like Gray Cook, and so it's not either or. I'm not stuck there. And I was very influenced by the early work of Gary Gray, but Gary Gray takes a very, very bottom-up approach. Love it. But I was also taught as a manual therapist, a leg length discrepancy can cause a scoliosis. But I tell you what, if you don't see well out of this eye, then you're going to bias your entire spine to the visual field. And so a lot of times scoliosis is because of a breathing problem, a visual problem, not just a foot or leg length problem. So I am obligated as a orthopedic specialist to take it from the top down and the bottom up. Which one helped me help you the most? That's the path we're going on. So
I love it. No, good. I find myself in parallel paths here, because it's not just always from the ground up, it's from the brain down, or from the top down, or it's from the center of mass, and it's a coordination of mass management. So here's the thing. You've got your screens, you see improvement after a movement. Therefore, that's your bellwether. That's your continuous assessment. And I don't know how many people actually do this. And I'll give you an example. A woman came in not too long ago, and she is in a generic strength conditioning group class, which the exercises are your basic push, pull, hinge, and so on, right? It's meant for the general population, but not for the specific individual. And that's, I think, the drawback or the downfall when we talk about group exercise in itself. It's not individualized for the person. So she would say, oh, it just keeps these, I don't know what's happening, but it keeps bothering the shoulder and so on. So we figured out what was going on with her body and got her to understand it. But what more to the point, I said, well, let's do something as simple as a toe touch, or let's put you on one leg and let's do a single leg balance, or let's do shoulder flexion assessment and see what your range of motion is like. Your autonomic nervous system is going to regulate your success or your limitations based on the stimulation it receives, the stimuli it receives at any given time. So let's have you do a squat and go ahead and check your toe touch. Did it improve? Did it stay the same, or did it get restricted? If it got restricted, something's not quite right. It's signaling right now that I am stressed and I need to confine myself for fear of further injury or going down that road. But if it improved my toe touch, this is the exercise you need. So it's almost like a barometer that we can use these the shoulder mobility, the toe touch, the single leg balance as an indication after every exercise. Now, some people really like that. Others feel like, oh, that's really just kind of over the top. I don't have to do that all the time. But do you ever do that? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, number one, the first thing I will admit is we've been asked for forever to shorten the screen, make it, more accessible. And I'm like, the thing I run into is how much are you willing to miss? And
Right.
on a new intake, I want the screen. One of the things that I think people misunderstand is I have no problem with doing a camera analysis, but there is something in the human brain, Rocky, when I make you face the kit, the wall, the obstacle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's what an FMS is. It is a movement quality obstacle course. And without the kit, if I just have you randomly squat, you don't have to squat within the confines of the phone booth I put you in. You just squat however you squat. So some of the mistakes I'm tracking on you may not even be mistakes if I had you squat in a certain organized way with a standardized foot position. Same way with an inline lunge. If I let you lunge wide, we won't see the mistake. But we
Right.
realized a long time ago, those NFL players that could get almost perfect lunges left and right, it didn't just show low risk, it also showed a competitive advantage. That's easy to explain. Lower center of gravity yields to better deceleration, better direction change. That's where most injuries occur in the NFL, but that's also where most of the best juke moves occur in the NFL. My point is, I've never been able to get quite as much of an authentic profile if I don't use some type of obstacle and make you move around it. Now, we've actually gotten rid of the kit on our self screen because we narrow the base and stagger the feet. So we put you in your limits of stability. You have to make this judgment call. Do I lose my balance to gain range of motion or not? And nobody's going to lose their balance. So if I put you in a lockup, you'll short the position. Now I can score it. Where most people make a mistake is they think I movement screen every session or every third session. Once I got you profile, once I know you're an extrovert, Rocky, that's how we're going to do this thing. We're going to do it in an extroverted way, introverted way. Once I know you're a leg raise problem, we're going to literally do a lot of stuff that's going to friction that leg raise, because if I can reset it, if I can fix that in a single session, then realize I demonstrated plasticity in you. But how am I going to convert that from a reset, which is what you and I did together, to a reinforcement, which is what your homework is? And that's where I start pulling out, hey, single leg deadlift. How many variations are there? Well, if you got wobbly balance, we give you 2 light kettlebells and let you have a balance load on one leg. But we go asymmetrical and we go right arm, left leg deadlift if we're trying to get that derotation into a golfer or a baseball player. So the minute I demonstrate that you are resettable, I look for workouts and little movement katas that reinforce that, so we don't have to do that many movement screens for 4 to 6 weeks. And then we bring you back in. Are you clean and can we get on to conditioning, or do you have another movement hiccup we need to polish a little bit? And you can share this with your viewers. I got 3 little things on YouTube. They're literally, instead of doing a single station corrective, what we realized is your brain really does hold on to a correction longer if I put you in at least 2 different spinal positions, like horizontal, vertical, or tall kneeling or half kneeling to standing. And then I friction that. So we've got a mobility flow, a stability flow, which is sort of ground up baby movements first, and then a symmetry flow, which is all on the feet. And if you already know that you have tendencies toward, I wake up stiff a lot, just hit the mobility flow and see what changes. Better if you got a baseline in front and back, and now you'll have your warm up. If you've had a concussion in a sport or an abdominal surgery, female complicated pregnancy, like start on the stability flow, get your core back. If you're pretty racked and stacked, but you fluctuate day to day, do the symmetry flow and just check that. So literally it's a 3-station ABC: awareness, what side is tighter and what movement pattern's tighter. Can breathing change it, reverse your inhale, exhale, and then control what did you gain on your second pass. So it's literally, the video takes about 10 minutes to watch, but once you know the movement, it's just you and a half foam roll sort of using a speed bump. And I tell all my kids who are getting ready to do that half foam roll little thing that you've seen me do, I'm like, why we got speed bumps in parking lots? Slow down and pay attention. You don't need a yoga mat. The world's already flat. You need a speed bump. Slow down and pay attention. So,
oh, beautiful. Okay. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about Perform Better, because we've got you're making the whole circuit here. You're going to be in all three locations. That's Chicago, Long Beach, and Providence, June, July, August, respectively.
You know what I told Chris? I said, did Mike Boyle cancel? Is that why I got 3 slots? Because Mike Boyle's he's in the Bahamas. You know,
dude, you're the headliner. You're kicking off like Friday morning, first thing.
Chris said it was the topic. And literally, Rocky, this is the first time I've told anybody this. Lee Burton came to me and said, Gray, talk about low back pain. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. It's Pandora's box, man. There's so many different ways it could go. And he goes, nope, you need to do it. This is your gig. That's really been my forte in pro sports. I get the backs and the necks that are trying to avoid surgery. So it's a hard thing to put, because the Perform Better is my favorite group, but it's my most diverse group. We've got trainers that literally got 2 weeks experience, and we got physical therapists and chiropractors older than me. But I started thinking about it, and I'm like, I do need to climb that mountain, and I do need to bring a breath of fresh air to low back pain. So I honestly think I got all 3 slots because of the topic that I picked. But I am going to try to bring as much integrity and awareness to this topic, because low back pain is not a diagnosis. It is a cluster of situations that I think strength coaches and trainers, massage therapists, PE teachers, coaches can manage, because there's a lot of boxes I check as a physical therapist that got nothing to do with your L4-5. It got a lot to do with your balance and your movement pattern and your sleep routine. So I'm really treating low back pain like a syndrome, not an anatomical fault. And so I'm a little bit intimidated by the subject matter, but at 59, I'm also challenged by it. So I'm gonna bring it as good as I can. But if you want to go paddleboarding in Long Beach, let me know, and I will alter my ticket on the front or back end, because that would easily make my trip have a highlight if we could just pop on a paddleboard for about an hour or 2. So,
dude, I would love to do that. But I'm not actually. I'll be at the NSCA conference in Kansas City. That's happening the same week in Long Beach, so I won't be there. But I will be in Providence. So maybe we can sneak out on a little East Coast version out of there somewhere. We'll have to figure that out.
We got to know 2 people with paddleboards around there. We can do that. Okay.
All right. We can do that for sure. Done. Now, that I got to say, I'm not much of a stand-up paddler, so you'll just blow me away. But if you want to grab some waves and prone, we could do that too.
Hey, it's water, man. I can work.
Dude, this has been great. I knew this time would fly by, and obviously we could keep on going for hours and hours. I had Al Vermeil on in the early years of the podcast, and oh my gosh, well, Al, he kept on going. I was thinking that I would only have his time for an hour. That brother talked for almost 2 hours. I couldn't get over it, and he just kept on going. I feel like we could have done the same thing. We'll just have to do part 2 another time down the road. But I'm looking forward to seeing you at Providence and Chicago, for that matter. If I can and squeeze that in between surf trips there in June, that would be great. Give us a little insight as to SFMA, FMS, your app. Just lay it out there. How can we find out more?
The app is called Simeo, and it's already in the App Store. I'm going to be talking about it at the events, and literally it just gave us an opportunity to say, I've always come at what influences movement and how can we get a fresh perspective, but we've been leaving out sleep, hydration, the way you breathe, your past medical history, your activity level. We've got the movement screen, but BMI and behavioral health. And so what we said is, what is the minimum sampling questions I can ask you about sleep? What is the single best breath hold test we can do to see if you're really using your lungs correctly? What are some nutritional awareness questions I could ask you to see if you've got an inflammatory diet? What's a self-screen that'll ping some of our most frequently flawed movement patterns? what activity levels are toxic on either end. And we just go through, it takes about 15 minutes. But what we've learned from this is we came at movement with movement correctives. But if you need a few self-care correctives, here's mine: sleep. I didn't know how to sleep till I was 50 years old. I basically told my wife, I'll sleep when I die. I think I can get it done. And until I really invested myself in heart rate variability and seeing how much deep sleep I was getting, I was realizing, well, I was having some tissue repair problems. So everybody's going to have a weak link in self-care, and everybody's probably going to have a weak link in movement. And if we're not looking at both those and lining those up like a set of gun sights, we're going to miss it. So this little app I call a pre-screen. It does not take the place of the FMS for a high-end athlete. It doesn't take the place for an SFMA for somebody who's a little bit broken. But I tell you what it does. My clients are so much more self-aware. And I'm a Southern gentleman. I'm not going to get on somebody or fat shame somebody or something like that about their lifestyle. But I literally had a patient in the parking lot confront me who wasn't my patient. I took myself out of practice and was doing some stuff. And he said, Gray, I'm really struggling. My surgeon thinks I need a back fusion. And I was just wondering, I know I'm not your patient and I haven't seen you in a while, but I just thought I'd ask you here in the parking lot. And I looked at him, and with as much love and compassion as I said, I'm like, dude, I'd make that decision 30 pounds from now. And I wouldn't have said that a few years ago had we not been doing these lifestyle surveys alongside a movement screen. He goes, what do you mean by that? I'm like, you drink a lot of soft drinks? He goes, yeah, about 3 Dr. Peppers a day. And I'm like, and he's a type 2 diabetic and stuff like that. I'm like, listen, without stirring up your back, you can lose weight. You can eat a little bit cleaner. Allison will work with you on that, but make some of these changes. I never thought about it again. 4 weeks later, I'm walking through the clinic. I see the guy. He's lost about 15 pounds. And he goes, hey, doc. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'm still drinking Dr. Pepper. And I'm like, you are? He goes, yeah, I have one on Sunday with my grandson. And I'm like, never stop that one. But my point is, I, as a PT, stay in my lane. I'm not a nutritionist, right? I'm not a breathing expert, but I tell you what, I can talk about what's not good enough in sleep. I can talk about what's not good enough breath hold. I can talk about inflammatory foods. I can talk about unsafe activity levels. And I gave myself permission to get up in your junk about your lifestyle. It ain't all about your corrective exercise if your lifestyle is toxic. And so this little app literally sets the stage for you to be a holistic life coach and a movement specialist at the same time. And if you ping something like type 2 diabetes, there's a lot of information out there that you can direct them to, so you're not out of your bounds. But if you're trying to get somebody better and not acknowledging that, if you got a total shoulder and you're a frozen shoulder and you're type 2 diabetic, it takes me twice as long to fix you. You need to know that up front. It's not that I'm a sucky therapist or your shoulder's that bad. Type 2 diabetics will not handle the tissue change it's going to make to get you out of that frozen shoulder. So let's talk about this in a realistic way. And the way we measure wellness now is not this high in the sky definition of wellness. How many risk factors do you have alongside your goal? Because if you have 7, it's going to take a little bit longer, but I'm in it with you. If you have 3, it's going to be a little bit faster, but let's look there. So we literally just go through and check the risk factors in the little app. You want to score above 70 on your wellness score. And if you don't, just start taking the advice it's feeding you. But it gets my patients and my athletes ready for the conversations ahead of time. And it's almost like having a receptionist who knows everything you know, but is just going to lay it out there a little bit. And then all of a sudden they're in your room and you can go deep. So
Sweet. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, and the success so far, has it been received well?
Dude, it made it. It's already published in the International Journal of Sport and Physical Therapy as having very, very reliable alignment with a full FMS by people who know how to do an FMS. So I'm saying, it really does set the stage. But if it uncovers a few medical issues, you can actually go into this because it's nothing but a survey and a screen. And I'll share it with you, and you guys can look at it. It issues a nice little report card. But yeah, I'm very excited about it because we're not so much stepping out of our movement lane because we want more business. You can't fix movement if you don't talk about sleep and breathing and hydration
Sure.
and nutrition. But you don't have to be a PhD in nutrition to tell people what inflammatory foods are or that they need to hydrate more. So I really think we can all learn from that. And I had to learn from that. And the first thing I had to do is take my own advice. So I wrote the whole book of Business of Movement about if you're in a leadership role and you're not eating the food you serve, I'd start there and fix yourself and then fix your staff and then let's go fix everybody. So
that's right. It starts at home. Man, this has been great. Gray, thank you, brother. I really appreciate your time and coming on. And I look forward to this summer and seeing you there.
I do. And if you need me back, I promise I won't wear sleeves next time and we'll do this thing right. Gun show on both coasts.
Now we're talking.
Boom! And just like that, we come to an end. Man, I just can't thank Gray enough for taking a little time out. Looking forward to connecting with him. In fact, if you do go to the Perform Better training summits, you can sit down at a table and have a great conversation with him anytime. Just go to performbetter.com and go down to where it says seminars. Click on that 3-day functional summit, and you're going to be in for a world of fun, networking, and education. I promise you. Also, NSCA, Kansas City, Missouri. They're going to have the national conference July 16th to the 19th. Hope to see you there. And you can always, check out my stuff, rockysnyder.com. Buy some stuff on there, read some blogs, listen to podcasts, a whole bunch more. I want to thank Setanta College for a great educational process I've been enjoying. And check out my book, Return to Center. We'll see you next week.